Police arrested shop owners. A judge ordered film copies to be destroyed. And a Bigfoot movie terrorized censors for 37 years. Because sometimes fake horror movies create real legal nightmares. These are 10 horror movies with real legal consequences. Let's start with The Night of the Demon. And no, not the good one from 1957. This is the 1980 American masterpiece where an anthropology professor and his students go looking for Bigfoot and find way more than they bargained for. Now, you might think a movie about a hairy monster living in the woods would be pretty harmless. Well, you would be wrong. Dead wrong. This thing got banned in the UK for 37 years. 37. That's longer than most of you, including myself, have probably been alive. The British government looked at this Bigfoot movie and said absolutely not for nearly 4 decades, which raises some questions about what exactly was happening in those woods. Here's the thing that made censors lose their minds. There's this scene where Bigfoot attacks some campers. Right? Standard monster movie stuff. Except this creature doesn't just kill one guy. It rips his thingy-majiggy clean off on camera in graphic detail. The British Board of Film Classification watched a Sasquatch commit castration and decided that was crossing every line that they had. But wait, it gets better. This wasn't the only scene that freaked people out. Bigfoot also ends up using someone's intestines as a flail, just grabs them right out of a guy and starts swinging them around. Plus there's impalement, eye gouging, and Girl Scouts getting slaughtered, all delivered with the production value of a high school film project and the subtlety of a brick through a window. The movie got released on VHS in the UK in 1983. By 1984, it was on the Department of Public Prosecution's list of video nasties. Shop owners who sold it could be charged with distributing obscene material. Actual criminal charges for selling a movie about Bigfoot. Police literally raided video stores looking for this thing. And here's where it gets really absurd. The movie barely shows any blood. Like it does, but most of the gore happens off screen or gets implied rather than directly shown. But something about the way it was filmed and what they did end up showing made authorities think they were looking at the most dangerous piece of entertainment ever created. Maybe it was the grimy pseudo-documentary style, or maybe it was the fact that everyone involved seemed to be taking this ridiculous premise completely seriously. The ban stayed in place until 1994, when they finally allowed a cut version with 1 minute and 41 seconds removed. Specifically, they chopped out the castration scene and the intestines as a weapon moment, because apparently those 19 seconds of Bigfoot brutality were so dangerous they needed to be locked away for over a decade. But even that wasn't enough. The fully uncut version remained illegal to sell until 2021. 2021, yeah. You could stream Netflix on your phone, order food with an app, and watch people do stupid stuff on TikTok, but you still couldn't legally buy the complete version of a Bigfoot movie from 1980 in the UK. During those 37 years, owning the uncut tape could get it confiscated by customs. Again, video store owners faced prosecution. All because a guy in a monkey suit was being really mean to campers in the woods. Now you can probably find it online for less than $5. Yeah, the same movie that got people arrested is sitting right there next to cooking shows and romantic comedies. Which makes you wonder, what exactly changed? Did society get more tolerant? Did the movie get less scary? Or were the people making these decisions in the first place completely out of their minds? But at the end of the day, at least everyone knew Bigfoot was fake, because Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, had a different problem. This one looked way too real. Way too real. Michael Rooker plays Henry, a drifter who kills people for no particular reason. The movie presents all of this in the most matter-of-fact way possible. No dramatic music, no fancy camera work, just Henry being Henry, which happens to involve murdering random strangers. The MPAA investigated this movie and slapped it with an X rating, not for sexual content, but for violence they felt too believable. They basically said, this is like Corn, but for murder, which meant no major theater chains would show it, and no newspaper would run ads for it. The film sat on a shelf for 4 years because nobody wanted to touch it. Finally got released in 1990, it went straight to art house theaters. You know, those places where film students go to feel smart about themselves. I can make that joke, I was a film student, so I can make fun of us. But even then, countries kept banning it. The UK said no to home video for 7 years. 7 years. And then Australia's censors looked at it and said, absolutely the not mate. But here's what freaked everyone out. There's this scene where Henry and his buddy Otis break into a family's house and murder everyone inside. Mom, dad, kids, the whole family. But here's the kicker. They film it on a camcorder. Then later, Otis watches the tape for fun. He just sits there rewinding his favorite murder moments like the guy you just met on a dating app showing you his favorite camera roll moments in his room. Why do people do that? I have never understood why someone just wants to like sit there on a date and show me their camera roll. I don't know you, bro. Tell me about it. I don't need to see it. So the censors watched this and realized something disturbing. The movie was putting them in the same position as Otis. They were watching footage of people getting killed for entertainment. Sure, it was fake, but it felt real enough that the line got really blurry really fast. But wait, there's more. Most horror movies give you some kind of comfort at the end. The bad guy gets punished. Justice happens. Good wins. Well, Henry doesn't do any of that. Henry just keeps going. He kills his friend Otis, then he kills Becky, the woman who might be the closest thing he's had to a girlfriend, and then the movie ends with Henry chopping up her body and driving away. No consequences, no justice, no lesson learned, just a serial killer who's really good at being a serial killer. The BBFC literally said the film lacked a moral center, which is a fancy way of saying this movie doesn't tell us murder is bad, and that makes us uncomfortable because we're old boomers who like making laws telling people things they should do with their life. The film got passed around underground for years. Horror fans treated it like the holy grail of forbidden cinema. You had to know a guy who knew a guy just to get a copy, all because it was too good at what it was trying to do. By the time censors finally allowed it, they had to cut scenes anyway. The UK chopped out chunks of the family massacre. Australia trimmed the worst parts. Everyone wanted to make sure you couldn't enjoy it too much. Henry was disturbing because it felt real, but some movies scared authorities by going completely over the top. Evilspeak takes a completely different approach to getting banned. This one said, what if we gave a bullied kid a computer and some ancient Satan spells? And somehow, that seemed like a reasonable movie premise in 1981. Clint Howard plays Stanley, a military academy cadet who gets picked on constantly. Instead of going to therapy or maybe just switching schools, Stanley decides to summon the actual devil using his computer. Now, keep in mind this is 1981. We're talking about computers that had less processing power than your microwave, but Stanley manages to use this thing to translate Latin spells and open a portal to hell, which raises some serious questions about what the kind of software they were
introducing Macintosh.
The movie slowly builds up to Stanley's revenge. Kids dump pig blood on him. They steal his stuff. They're basically asking for supernatural punishment, and Stanley delivers. By the end, he's floating around with glowing eyes, chopping people's heads off with a sword, and commanding a herd of demonic pigs to eat his enemies. The British censors lost their mind looking at this. Not because of the computer angle, not because of the bullying, but because of the decapitations. Lots and lots of decapitations. Stanley goes absolutely wild in the final act. Heads are literally flying everywhere. One priest gets his skull split completely in half, on screen in loving, beautiful 4K detail. The BBFC cut over 3 minutes from the theatrical version in 1983. 3 minutes. That's a significant chunk of a movie. They chopped out most of the gore, all of the pig attack scenes, and basically anything that showed people dying in creative ways. What was left was probably just Stanley typing angrily at his computer. But here's where it gets really stupid. The uncut version made its way onto VHS and immediately got banned as a video nasty. Police started seizing copies from video stores. Again, shop owners face criminal charges because apparently they're bigger criminals than drug dealers these days. All because a movie dared to suggest that computers and Satan might make a decent team. The MPAA originally gave it an X rating. An X rating for a movie about a kid getting revenge with help from his computer. They made the distributor cut scenes just to get it down to an R, which means somewhere there's footage of Clint Howard being even more disturbing than what made it to theaters. Multiple countries banned it outright. Germany, Finland, Sweden, they all said no. They looked at this movie about technology summoning ancient evil and decided their citizens weren't ready for that kind of forward thinking. And the film ended up staying banned in the UK until 2004. 23 years later. Yeah, for 23 years, Stanley's computer revenge fantasy was considered too dangerous for British audiences for over 2 decades. During that time, actual computers got way better at doing terrible things, like tricking me into believing there's hot single ladies in my area. But apparently, fictional computer Satan was still off limits. When they finally allowed it, nobody really cared anymore. The special effects looked dated, and the computer stuff seemed ancient. What once terrified censors into seizures now look peacefully boring. Stanley's high-tech demonic summoning had all the menace of my old Game Boy in my closet. But back in 1981, this was cutting-edge horror. A bullied kid using technology to get supernatural revenge seemed genuinely frightening. After all, these people believed the world was going to end at the turn of the millennia. Yeah, I don't think putting lead in the water was a good idea, Grandpa. But at least Stanley's computer worked, unlike most things that didn't work in our next film. Tenebrae is what happens when a respected art house director makes a horror movie and somehow gets treated worse than the guy who made the Bigfoot castration cinema. Dario Argento was already famous for making beautiful, violent films. This one follows an American writer in Rome who gets caught up in murders that copy his latest book. Stylish camera work, gorgeous lighting, and people getting slashed by a maniac with a razor. Argento spent serious money on this thing. There's this famous crane shot that goes on forever, swooping around buildings just to show off. The whole movie looks expensive, professional, artistic, everything the video nasties usually weren't, but that didn't save it from getting banned. The UK censors watched Tenebrae and freaked out over exactly 6 seconds of footage. 6 seconds in a movie that's almost 2 hours long. There's this scene where a killer chops off a woman's arm with an axe. Blood sprays everywhere. The camera doesn't look away, and apparently those few seconds were so traumatic that British authorities couldn't handle it. They also had problems with a throat slashing scene. Again, just a few seconds of screen time, but the way Argento filmed it made the violence feel more intense than usual. The blood hits a white wall and just paints it red. Very dramatic, it's very Italian, it's very banned. And here's what's really nuts. The movie got a brief theatrical run in the UK with cuts. People could go see it in cinemas, but when it hit video, suddenly it became this dangerous piece of contraband. Same movie, different format, completely different legal status. The ban lasted 16 years. 16 years for 6 seconds of gore. During that time, you could probably rent way more violent movies from the same video store. But Tenebrae was special, which meant shop owners could get arrested for selling it. Critics called it misogynistic because most of the victims are women, which is fair, except that's true for basically every slasher movie ever made. But Argento's camera seemed to enjoy the violence a little too much for comfort. The kills were too stylish, too well crafted, too beautiful. Meanwhile, Argento kept insisting the movie was actually a commentary on violence in media. He claimed the whole thing was about how dangerous it is to glamorize murder, which is a pretty rich argument coming from the guy who spent millions of dollars making murder look as glamorous as possible. Other countries were way more relaxed about it. Italy released it uncut. France didn't care. Even Germany, which banned basically everything, allowed it with minor cuts. But Britain said absolutely not and stuck to that decision for over a decade. When they finally released a censored version in 1999, they still cut 5 seconds from the arm chopping scene. 5 seconds out of 6. They basically edited it down to a woman raising her arm and then not having one anymore. All the actual violence got removed. The fully uncut version didn't appear until I was 4 years old when I first watched it in 2003. Thanks, Mom and Dad. 20 years later after its original release. But by then, we had Saw movies coming on the horizon, so what once seemed unbearably violent now looked pretty tame. I guess that's progress. So yeah, Argento was a little too stylish with his murder weapons. Now you wouldn't think it, but power tools proved to be even more problematic for our next film. The Toolbox Murders decided that regular murder weapons were for amateurs. Why use a knife when you have a perfectly good power drill? The movie opens with 20 minutes of a masked killer working his way through an apartment complex, dispatching women with whatever tools he can find around the house. Drill, hammer, nail gun, it's Home Depot's worst nightmare. This wasn't your typical slasher movie build-up. Most films give you some character development before the killing starts. Maybe a little backstory. The Toolbox Murders just goes straight to the tool-based murder spree. 20 minutes of watching someone turn a hardware store into a weapon collection. No plot, no dialogue, just craftsmanship of the worst kind. The drill scene became legendary for all the wrong reasons. A woman gets cornered in her apartment and the killer just goes to work with the power drill on her head. The camera doesn't cut away. It doesn't imply anything. It shows the whole thing in graphic detail. British censors watched this and immediately started having meetings about what constitutes as acceptable entertainment. But here's what really sent authorities over the edge. There's this scene where a woman is taking a bath, minding her own business, enjoying some personal time, and the killer shows up with a nail gun. The combination of the nudity and power tools was apparently too much for civilized society to handle. The movie also got marketed as being based on a true story, which is always a red flag. When a film about power tool murders claims to be true, you know someone's stretching the definition of both true and story, but it worked. People showed up thinking they're about to see real crime footage. The BBFC cut over 3 minutes from the theatrical version in 1979, 3 minutes of a 90-minute movie. That's a significant chunk of power tool action getting removed. What was left probably looked pretty confusing. Guy picks up drill, woman screams, cut to the next scene. Riveting absolute cinema. When the uncut version hit VHS in 1981, it immediately got banned as a video nasty. And this time, they weren't messing around. Shop owners actually got prosecuted, convicted, criminal records for selling a movie about household maintenance gone wrong. Picture explaining this to your family. Billy, what the hell? Why are you in jail? Well, Dad, I sold a movie about a guy who really likes his power tools. Yeah, that's not exactly the kind of crime that you think would get you arrested. A film stayed effectively banned until 2000, 21 years. During that time, actual power tools got way more dangerous and way easier to buy. But fictional power tool violence was still too much for British audiences to handle. When they finally allowed a cut version, they removed 1 minute and 45 seconds, almost 2 full minutes from the movie. The nail gun scene got chopped up, the drill sequence got trimmed down, what remained was probably just a guy looking menacingly at his toolbox. The fully uncut version didn't appear until 2017, which is 38 years after the original theatrical release. By then, you could watch way worse stuff on YouTube, like this YouTube channel. But it took nearly 4 decades for British authorities to decide that fictional drill murders were acceptable entertainment. So yeah, power tools were problematic. You know what else wasn't considered acceptable entertainment though? Normal tools, because Axe proves that sometimes less is more, especially when it comes to getting prosecuted by the British government. This movie clocks in at just 68 minutes. That's shorter than most Marvel movies' third acts, but somehow those 68 minutes contained enough objectionable content to land people in actual legal trouble. The plot here is refreshingly simple. 3 criminals on the run decide to hide out at a farmhouse. Bad choice. The farmhouse belongs to Lisa, a teenage girl who lives with her paralyzed grandfather. The criminals figure they can push around a teenager and an old man in a wheelchair. They figured wrong. Lisa doesn't waste time with elaborate revenge schemes. No complex death traps, no psychological games. She just starts picking off the intruders one by one. Rifle to the chest, axe to the neck, whatever gets the job done. It's efficient, practical, very DIY. The movie was so low budget, it makes my student film from college look expensive. Grainy film stock, amateur acting, minimal sets. This wasn't some Hollywood production with extensive special effects. This was 3 guys with the camera shooting in someone's actual house. But that rough, unpolished look is exactly what freaked out the censors. Because again, the British authorities saw this thing and immediately added it to the video nasty list. Not because it was particularly gory, not because it was especially well made, but because it felt uncomfortably real. When you're watching something that looks this crude, the line gets blurry. That's partially why I think the Poughkeepsie tapes is one of the scariest horror movies out there, because it blurs that line so well and it's actually a decent story. The scene that caused all the trouble lasts about 19 seconds. Lisa sneaks up on one of the criminals while he's sleeping and slashes his throat with a straight razor. Blood gushes out, he dies. That's it. 19 seconds out of a 68-minute movie. But those 19 seconds were apparently so dangerous, they required government intervention. Here's what's really absurd. Axe was one of the first films to actually get prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act. Not warned, not threatened, actually prosecuted. Someone went to court over a movie that's shorter than a TV episode and looks worse than most home videos. The distributor got found guilty. Copies were seized from video stores. Shop owners faced criminal charges. All because a teenager with a razor blade was considered too much for British society to handle. The film stayed banned until 1999. 25 years later. When they finally allowed it, they still cut those crucial 19 seconds. Throat slashing got removed completely. What was left was probably Lisa approaching a guy with a razor, and then him just being mysteriously dead. The director, Friedrich Friedel, had no idea his little movie was causing international legal drama. He was just some guy who made a cheap horror film and moved on with his life. Years later, he found out people were going to court over his work. That's gotta be a weird phone call to get. The fully uncut version didn't appear in the UK until 2005, 31 years after it was made. By then, the whole thing looked incredibly dated. What once seemed shockingly violent now looked quaint. Lisa's straight razor revenge felt positively restrained compared to most modern horror you could see, Another movie that did not have any restraint was Prisoner of the Cannibal God. and this managed to get banned for something most other horror films only pretended to do. While everyone else was using pig intestines and corn syrup, this movie decided to film actual animals getting killed on camera for entertainment, which turned out to be a really bad eye from both a legal and a moral standpoint. The movie stars Ursula Andress, who you might remember as the Bond girl who emerged from the ocean in a bikini. Here she's trekking through the New Guinea jungle looking for her missing husband. What starts as a standard adventure film quickly turns into something way more disturbing once the cannibals show up. Now, the fake violence was bad enough. There's a scene where cannibals dismember a guy and eat his organs while he's still alive. The camera shows everything. No cutaways, no implied horror, just straight up cannibalism served as entertainment. And as you can imagine if you're a fan of my channel, British censors watched this and immediately started having nightmares. But the real problem was the animal footage. Someone decided this movie needed scenes of actual animals getting ended. A snake eating a monkey, a crocodile gutting a lizard. Real deaths filmed for a movie, included for shock value, which crosses the line from tasteless entertainment to possible evidence of animal cruelty. What is it about cannibal movies and needing to have animal violence in them? I feel like it's like some bingo sheet they're all trying to check off. I can list 3 of them that have done this exact problem. And because of that, British authorities didn't just ban this as a video nasty. They banned it under animal cruelty laws. Selling it wasn't just obscure, it was potentially illegal under completely different legislation. You could get prosecuted for distributing animal torture footage, which is a much more serious charge than selling a gory horror movie. Other countries had the same reaction. Australia refused to classify it. Germany put it on their banned list. Nobody wanted to deal with a movie that combined fake human gore with real animal death. It was the worst of both worlds rolled into one convenient package. The film got successfully prosecuted in the UK. Not just threatened, not just warned, actually prosecuted. Courts found it obscure and ordered copies to be destroyed. During the ban years, customs officials would confiscate imported copies. Owning the uncut version was genuinely risky business. What made this different from other banned films was that the animal cruelty was undeniably real. You couldn't argue it was just movie magic or special effects. Those animals actually died for this movie, which meant distributing it could violate animal protection laws in addition to obscenity statutes. The UK finally allowed a cut version in 2001, but they removed over 4 minutes of footage. That's not just trimming the worst bits, that's a major surgery on a movie. After animal cruelty laws got updated to exempt historical works. 40 years after it was made, they literally had to change the law to make this movie legal again. Modern releases come with warnings about the animal content, not because it's gory, but because it documents actual cruelty, which puts viewers in this really uncomfortable position of watching real death for entertainment. That type of moral questioning never really goes away regardless of how the laws change. So we can all agree that real animal death was disturbing, but the oldest banned film proves gore was shocking, even in 1968, back when your grandpa was built different. Because the Ghastly Ones holds a special distinction. It's the oldest movie on the entire Video Nasties list. It was made in 1968, when the Beatles were still together, and so were probably your grandparents. Which means British authorities looked at a horror movie from the Lyndon Johnson administration and decided it was too dangerous for 1980s audiences. Director Andy Milligan made this thing for basically no money. 3 couples show up at an old mansion to hear a will. They have to spend 3 nights in the house. Surprise, there's a killer hiding in the attic who starts picking them off one by one. Revolutionary stuff, really groundbreaking cinema here. What made this different from other 60s horror was the gore level. Most horror movies back then would show you a guy getting stabbed and then cut to his face making a surprised expression. Milligan showed you the actual stabbing, and the disemboweling, and someone's hand getting chopped off. All with bright red paint that looked exactly like bright red paint. Basically, the effects were laughably bad even by 1968 standards. Milligan used actual animal intestines from a butcher shop for the gut spilling scenes, which sounds gross until you realize this was cutting edge special effects for a guy working with pocket change. He was basically doing dinner theater, except the dinner was raw meat and the theater was someone's basement. When this thing showed up on VHS in 1983, nobody knew what to do with it. It looked ancient. The film quality was terrible. The acting was worse, but those gore scenes were still pretty intense even 15 years later. So onto the video nasty list it went. And here's what's really stupid about the whole situation. The movie was actually successfully prosecuted. A judge looked at this amateur hour gore fest and ordered all copies destroyed. Destroyed. Not banned, not censored, destroyed. Someone in a courtroom decided that 1960s intestines were a threat to the public's safety. So the film completely vanished from Britain for decades. You couldn't buy it, you couldn't rent it, or even find bootleg copies. It became this legendary piece of forbidden cinema that most people have heard about, but nobody had actually seen, which again probably made it seem way more dangerous than it actually was. Meanwhile, Andy Milligan had no idea his little gore movie was causing international legal drama. He moved on to making other terrible movies that nobody cared about. Years later, he probably found out that his 1960s splatter film was being treated as criminal contraband in foreign countries. The ban lasted so long that most people forgot the movie existed. It wasn't until 2002 that it quietly appeared on DVD. And no, it wasn't even officially approved, it just sort of showed up. But by then, the BBFC had basically forgotten they'd ever banned it in the first place. It's kind of like when I got in trouble as a little kid, and I knew I was in trouble for like a week or something, but I hope my parents were like too busy with their own lives so that they would remember that I was like actually in trouble. I don't know, was I the only one that did that? 52 years after it was made, someone at the BBFC probably looked at this thing and wondered what all the fuss was about. 1960s gore that looked faked in 1968 wasn't exactly intimidating based on the YouTube era we are currently in. You can probably now buy the Ghastly Ones on any of the streaming services out there. So the same movie that got copies destroyed by court order is available to download through streaming, which really makes you wonder about the decision-making process behind these bans. So vintage gore eventually became acceptable, but gender confusion still worried censors in the 80s, because Unhinged managed to be both banned and not banned at the same time, which sounds impossible, but welcome to British censorship logic. The BBFC watched this slasher movie, gave it an 18 rating, and released it in cinemas without any problems. But then the exact same movie hit video stores and suddenly became too dangerous for public consumption. The plot follows 3 college girls who crash their car and end up staying at a creepy Victorian mansion. There's Mrs. Penrose, an old woman who really hates men, and her shy daughter Marion, who acts weird around the visitors. One by one, the girls start getting murdered by someone with a scythe and some serious anger management issues. The big twist comes at the end when Marion is revealed to actually be Mrs. Penrose's son. She, or he, has been living as a woman his whole life, dressing in women's clothes, and murdering anyone who threatens to expose the family secret. For 1982, this was pretty shocking stuff because gender identity wasn't exactly a common topic in slasher movies. British censors had already decided this was fine for theaters. Adults could buy tickets and watch this all play out on the big screen, but when the same movie showed up on VHS, it immediately got banned as a video nasty. Same content, different format, completely different legal status. Here's what made this ban especially stupid though. The movie wasn't even that gory compared to other nasties. Sure, there's a throat slashing with a scythe, someone gets hit with a hatchet, but this was pretty restrained compared to like the gut spilling, head chopping competition we have with a bunch of other movies. Yet somehow, it ended up on the prosecution list. The problem might have been with the shower scene. One of the girls takes a bath while the killer watches from outside. So there's like nudity plus voyeurism plus impending murder was apparently too much for home viewing. Though you could still see it in cinemas where I guess the combination was less threatening to society, but watching it at home, yeah, you can't do that. When the prosecution cases started falling apart, Unhinged was one of the first to get dropped. Lawyers pointed out that the BBFC had already approved it for theaters. It's hard to argue something's criminally obscene when the government's own censorship board said it was fine 6 months earlier. The film got removed from the ban list in 1985. The distributor had gone out of business. Nobody wanted to re-release a movie that had been labeled a video nasty, even if the charges got dropped. And when someone finally tried to put it back up on video in 1987, the BBC demanded cuts anyway. Over a minute of violence got removed. The scythe scene got trimmed. The hatchet murder got reduced. What remained was probably just girls running around a house looking scared. And the fully uncut version didn't appear until 2004. By then, the gender killer twist seemed almost quaint, and what once shocked audiences now felt extremely outdated. But there's one more movie out there that got banned, and this movie is one of my favorite movies out there. And you can watch it for free today on YouTube, which I'll tell you how to do afterwards. And guess who directed it? Peter Jackson. Yup, the guy who did Lord of the Rings did a horror movie. And it's about zombies, and it's got a ton of gore. Braindead comes from New Zealand, made by some little guy you may not know named Peter Jackson, who later did some movies about hobbits. But before he was making family-friendly fantasy epics, Jackson decided to create what might be the goriest film ever made. And when I say gory, I mean they used 300 liters of fake blood. 300 liters. That's enough to fill a bathtub twice. The plot is simple, and it kicks ass for the Lord.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Soon the whole town is infected, and our hero Lionel has to deal with an undead outbreak using whatever he can find around the house, which turns out to be a lawnmower. The lawnmower scene became legendary. Lionel grabs a push mower and just goes to town on a room full of zombies. Arms flying, heads rolling, intestines everywhere. It's 10 minutes of the most creative zombie destruction ever filmed. Blood sprays across every surface. Body parts hit the camera lens. It is absolute carnage to the level that it's funny. But here's what made censors lose their minds. This wasn't serious horror. This was comedy. Jackson was making people laugh while showing the most extreme violence imaginable. Zombies literally get blended in a kitchen mixer. A zombie baby is terrorizing a park. There are intestines coming to life and chasing people around. It's all presented as slapstick humor. German authorities watched this and immediately banned it. Not just restricted, banned. Possession of the uncut version was illegal. Yes, police could confiscate copies. You could literally get arrested for owning a comedy about zombie lawn care. The ban lasted 26 years. 26 years. Other countries were more reasonable, but not by much. Singapore banned it outright. South Korea said absolutely not. The UK cut scenes but allowed most of it, which is weird because the UK bans everything. The US released it unrated, which meant most theaters wouldn't show it. All because Peter Jackson got really creative with fake blood. What freaked everyone out was the sheer volume of gore, but most horror movies give you brief moments of violence. Braindead gives you 90 minutes of non-stop carnage. The blood literally never stops flowing. Body parts keep flying. It's relentless in the most funny way possible. The German ban finally got lifted in 2019. German authorities looked at this movie again after 26 years and decided it was actually pretty funny. What once seemed dangerously violent now looked cartoonish. Jackson's zombie comedy had gone from criminal contraband to cult classic. The film's now considered a masterpiece of horror comedy. Film schools teach classes about it. Critics write essays praising its creativity. Peter Jackson went from making illegal zombie movies to directing the biggest fantasy franchise in cinema history. That's quite a career progression. And you can now watch Braindead on YouTube for free for some reason. I don't know. Literally just look it up. Keep this on the low though, because this has been up for a couple of years now and I don't know how it's still there. I'd actually say it's a really good movie and it's funny and it's gross. So if you like all that stuff, you should probably watch it after this video. And speaking of that, most of these movies are actually now available for any of us to watch, which just kind of goes to show you how scared old people are of movies. Maybe sometimes it's justified, but I'd say in 95% of cases, it's just old people getting scared over nothing. Anyways, were there any movies I missed? Do you want me to talk about more in the upcoming videos? Make sure to comment them down below and let me know if you guys enjoy this content, because we've been doing a bunch of new series and I see a lot of positive response on them. So if you guys like them, I'm gonna keep doing more. Make sure to like this video to let me know you want to see more of this, and subscribe to the channel as it helps me out and it helps feed my dog Flapjack. And if you want to watch another video just like this one, click the video on screen now.